Welcome to IPA Encounters. My name is John Roskam and I'm the Executive Director of the Institute of Public Affairs. Tonight is my very great pleasure to be talking with Peta Credlin about many issues, in particular, what happens when the media doesn't tell the truth. We've got some 600 IPA members with us today, live across Australia. We're coming to you from the Ballymaya studios here in the IPA offices in Melbourne. We've received hundreds of questions. We're not going to be able to get through all of them in an hour, but what we've done is we've got some audio questions, some video questions, and we've also taken a representative sample of questions from members about the media, about politics, about public policy, and importantly, about what has happened to our freedoms in the last 18 months or so in Australia. Before I begin the conversation with Peta, let me say a few words of introduction about Peta Credlin. Peta grew up in country Victoria. She qualified in law at the University of Melbourne and the Australian National University. She has worked as a senior advisor to ministers in the communications portfolio, the defence portfolio, foreign policy. She worked as senior advisor to Brendan Nelson and Malcolm Turnbull when they were leaders of the opposition, and of course was chief of staff to Tony Abbott as Prime Minister. And Tony, as you know, was appointed a distinguished fellow of the IPA on Australia Day this year. Peta started at Sky News in 2016. In August 2017, Peta was part of a now famous interview with Alan Jones and Dr. Peter Ridd, where Alan and Peta spoke to Peta about the science of the Great Barrier Reef, and Peter Ridd pointed out a lot of that science is untested, unverified. That interview was one of the reasons why Peter Ridd was sacked from James Cook University. And of course, as you know, next month in the High Court in Canberra, the lawfulness of Peta's sacking is going to be tested. Peta, we are absolutely thrilled you are with us today. Thank you so much. One of the main reasons we're talking with you today is because of what you did in October last year here in Victoria, in Melbourne. Dan Andrews had given something like 100 days straight of press conferences. Not a serious question had been asked. You came to his press conference and in 10 minutes, you got more information for us as Victorians and us as Australians than the entire media contingent had done in months. Tell us about what happened and tell us, why did you do it?
Great to be with you, John, and to all the IPA members around the country. I'll have something to say to you actually a bit later on about your support of me last year, because your organisation here in Melbourne was just extraordinary, but I'll leave that for a bit later on. I'm thrilled to be here, and we're turning the tables here because I usually interview here on my show. I'm not a journalist, and I am quick to say that, right? I'm a commentator. My politics are known. I'm of a centre-right conservative persuasion, not always a Liberal persuasion. I'm sure I get people cranky in Canberra from the Liberal Party about some of the positions I hold. But you know where I'm coming from, and I'm not a paid-up member of the Journalists' Union or anything like that. So I am entitled, though, to go to a press conference. I hadn't in the past because I had thought perhaps it would be a circus if I turned up, and if I was going to turn up, it had to be something that was fairly significant. I had sat through 98 of the Andrews press conferences, and in part it was to save my marriage that I went, because I was yelling at the TV so often in that last sort of 80 onwards. And my husband said, for God's sake, get down there. You know, you're driving.
So we can thank Brian for this. You
can thank Brian Loughnane for it. But I had started reading a lot of the documentation on the Code Inquiry. And you mentioned I'd worked in the defence portfolio. I'd worked in the intelligence part of the Minister's Office, the responsibilities for then the ASD, the Australian Signals Directorate. So I understood, and through the Telecommunications Act and working for Communications Minister, I understood exactly what the search warrant powers were and the remit for getting into telecommunications. And I remember reading, in particular, the then Police Minister, Graham Ashton's evidence to
Chief Commissioner, yes.
Now, he had gone by the time of the Code Inquiry, but he had made it clear when he was questioned about getting an instruction, but couldn't remember who it was from, that police didn't have to be involved in hotel quarantine. But it was very interesting. In this back and forwards with counsel assisting, he made mention of the fact, but of course, you only have my outgoing calls. And I thought, well, why would he say that? And that led me to think, well, of course, we don't have their incoming calls. I just assumed we'd have their incoming calls. Why wouldn't we have had a proper warrant? Why didn't we have the incoming calls? Well, we didn't have the incoming calls because it was a kangaroo court, basically, right? It was a wet letter sort of inquiry. And so when I went there and fronted Andrews, why on earth, and then all this gobbledygook, but okay, you have the power to hand over those records. We don't need a warrant, Premier. If you've got nothing to hide, where are they? And over the weekend, the head of Premier and Cabinet was gone. And it put pressure on the government about, and we'll get to Andrews, I'm sure, tonight, but his extraordinary capacity, not just to spin, right? We've all seen spin, but to twist and turn the truth and to have that room who were acolytes of him. Those journalists were acolytes. He passes out favours. They get the questions that give them a run on the news that night. He will bully, particularly the women. We saw that with Rachel Baxendale. I thought she did an extraordinary job. He will bully particularly the women or those from the centre-right if he doesn't get the run he wants the next day. But we can see how adept he is at controlling that room and twisting words around. And he has, I mean, fortunately, I took in all my hard evidence, but he would say, well, I didn't say that. I'm like, well, I've got your transcript. You did say that, but he didn't. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh God, maybe I brought the wrong transcript. I mean, maybe he didn't say it. So you second guess yourself. He's the master at it. That's why I turned up.
Were you surprised at the reaction from the media?
Yes, I was. What was interesting, I went on a Friday, which is the dead zone, right? So all the big kahunas in the press go, we don't want to be there on a Friday. They've got more important things to do. So it was sort of the second 11. And they were a bit discombobulated when I turned up. I was in the Sky seat, so I wasn't taking anyone's seat that shouldn't have, been excluded or anything like that. But when I asked a question, and I let them all go, I went at the end, and they were relatively okay, but my phone lit up like a Christmas tree because it sort of exploded outside the room. And when I turned up again on the Monday after the chief public servant had been removed, it was interesting. Raphael Epstein and a few others were there.
From the ABC.
From the ABC, all designed, in my view, to interrupt the play, right? So when I was asking a couple of questions, they would jump in or he would throw the question over to them, and it was to put pressure on me. And Epstein, in fact, when I sat down, said, oh, can I do an interview with you afterwards? And I said, no, thanks. If I've got something to say, I'll say it on my show. But there was sort of a move on. And then there was all the Twitter camps coming out and saying, well, she's got no right to be there. She's not a journalist.
I was astounded by this, the fact you're not a journalist, so you're not representing us as Victorians or Australians, and you don't seem to then have the right to ask a question.
But if going to 99 press conferences mean you just swallow the rubbish from Andrews, I don't want to be a journalist either. Right? If that's what a journalist is, that you're not chasing the truth and you're not putting the government of the day, whomever that might be, under some pressure in terms of taxpayer lives, taxpayer expenditure, what good are you? And
a lockdown that was almost the harshest in the world for months as a result of the bungling, which it took you to uncover.
Yep, and it's still unravelling.
Can I then ask you, what does this say about the media, that it took you as an outsider to turn up for 10 minutes and change the entire dynamic and ask questions that we had all been asking, but none of them had wanted to ask? What does this say about their credibility, about their standing, and the degree to which we should trust what the media talks to us about? So
I grew up here, as you know, and even when I had my 15 years in Canberra, I was constantly back and forwards to Victoria. That's the nature of a political job. And my family's still here. So I thought I was relatively connected to media, to Melbourne, John. I had underestimated how Victoria had fundamentally changed. Until you live back in the state, or in any state, you miss the nuance. And I think the media in Victoria, Labor are brutal. The Libs don't punish the way Labor punishes. They punish people who might be employed by particular companies, and they'll say to their head CEO, sorry, mate, if you want to come back through the door after a change of government, you need to get rid of X, Y and Z. I am conscious of them naming staff, and I certainly know with the media, people are left off distribution lists. They don't get announced, advance notice of particular announcements. They can't get out there with their cameras. They get then pressure from their bosses that they weren't able to cover the story. They don't get the interviews. They're treated with disdain. You saw how Andrews even reacted to Lee Sales. I mean, she's from the ABC, for goodness sake, but he has a glass jaw in that respect. And what I found even more debilitating than how the media was patsies of the bloke was the way it's happening right now. So many of the big institutions that are supposed to be a check on balance of power of government have not just people there that owe a loyalty to the Labor Party, but they owe, in many instances, former staff, etc., a personal fealty to him.
Is that how they live with themselves, understanding that the media, their role is now no longer to enforce accountability, no longer to ask questions, but to support a particular worldview and to be part of the I Stand with Dan crowd?
I think there are too many journalists who think that they are players.
Yeah.
Now, I'm no issue if they want to call themselves a commentator and make their political leanings known. But just by the nature of the questions they ask, the stories they leave, the stories they run with, but the stories they leave, there's a huge element of political choice and design that goes into that commercial TV 6 o'clock bulletin that you would think is relatively straight. It's anything but.
Can we ever get back to a bipartisan media, to a media that holds politicians account, or have we now passed the threshold whereby the media and individual journalists are going to be players? And we've seen individual journalists being players in what's been happening in Canberra over the last few months.
I think it's irretrievable, and I'll tell you why. We're both of an age when people who wanted to be journalists were cadets.
Yep.
And they came up through the ranks. They had to demonstrate their impartiality. They were graded, went through the ranks, and there were big players in the newsroom who they learnt from, that they understood the ethics of being a journalist.
And they could have still been political, but they were ethical.
Correct. And they weren't non-political.
Yes. Yeah.
They were apolitical.
Yep.
But in the best example of a public servant, you don't want a public servant to be politically naive, but you don't want them to play the politics in their job. But you want them to be aware of the political circumstances. You want the journalists to be aware of political circumstances, to be knowledgeable. And when they write an op-ed, they can be more expansive. When they're at the front of the paper or news bulletin or whatever, we want and we should have straight news reporting. I think those days are gone.
So where do we get our news from now?
I think what's happening is people are, and this is very much a US phenomenon that started about 15 years ago, but people are basically stovepiping their content. If you have a centre-right view, now I will tell you things that might upset you if you're on the centre-right, but I'm not going to treat you with a lack of respect for having a centre-right view. And so people will look for news content service if you're on the centre-right out of somewhere like Sky News or The Australian. And if you're of the left or the hard left, you don't even want to hear that debate, right? You want to cancel all of that out and you will move to your own sources.
You want to be Malcolm Turnbull or Kevin Rudd and say it must be censored.
Yes. Yes. But we need more voices in the debate, not less. We need more intelligent argument and analysis from both sides. Look, I'm not scared of the debate. Leftists are terrified of the debate. The centre-right wants the debate. We encourage the debate.
Sky has so much more political diversity than the ABC.
So how does the ABC get away with it?
Because the ABC has so many more supporters in civil society.
But it
I
doesn't
would
have
argue.
it. Well, I think you're right, but it doesn't have audience share.
It doesn't have audience share.
It doesn't have audience share, and see, every other media business has to
Respond to its consumers.
live and die
Yeah.
on its ability to attract eyeballs and ears, not the ABC.
So then flowing from this, and this is something that's often been raised with me, where does the middle meet? Where does the middle get mediated by what the mainstream media used to do? So here in Melbourne, I grew up with The Age, and you knew The Age had a certain political perspective, but it also looked to diversity of opinion. Where can there be in the future a place where you can have argument and discussion in the media? Can that place come back?
If I had, you may have confidence, I am waning, confidence that the curriculum and our universities were turning out well-rounded, open-minded, interested in contestability young people. I would say the era we live in, where you can access primary source material, documents from the Code
And make up your own mind.
Correct. We have never been in a more information-rich era. We're in that now. And if you have an inquiring mind, if you are open-minded and you want a fact-based analysis and you want to judge things yourself, we've never had more accessibility of all of that data and reports and information than before. The problem is it's there, but particularly young people, they don't go looking for that. You know, that they have a view and they never want to test that view. Whereas I think one of the wonderful things growing up in the pre-internet age, there was something to be admired by someone reaching adulthood and wanting to test. You know, you grew up in a conservative household, you go off the rails at university, you get mugged by a mortgage, you come back to the fold. You know, there was something about our era where university campuses, where you would test the proposition and you love that debate. Not so much anymore.
And as an active Liberal student on campus, there wasn't the disdain that so many Conservative students now talk to me about, whereby their left-wing friends will literally not talk to them.
And I would love, I don't want to change the word conservative, but I want to find a way to own it again as something to be proud of. And I want people to understand what progressive means. Because the real pejorative on conservative, there's not a pejorative on moderate liberals or the progressive side of politics, but it's regressive. The progressives aren't progressive, they are regressive, particularly on issues of gender and women in particular.
Let's come back to you, because many members have wanted me to ask about what happened in October and your reaction to it. So we have the first question from Mitch on video, Mitch from Victoria.
Hi, my name is Mitch. I'm from Victoria. I'll try and keep it quick. My question is, how do you deal with criticism directed your way for speaking out on controversial issues within Australia?
Well, that's a great question from Mitch. You'd expect me to say this after, the end of the Abbott years, but I think I've got a pretty thick skin. One of the things growing up in a small country town from pretty humble, modest family stock in the Mallee is I know absolutely who I am. And I still have mates that I went to school with. They are my dearest and closest friends. Not people I picked up in politics when they want to scratch your back and they want something from you, but genuine old friends who keep me grounded. And I'm very sure of what I think. I'm confident in what I think. I think that we are at a very dangerous time in our history as Australians and in the West more broadly. And I think we need more people to be public defenders, spread the load and the hate amongst all of us, not just a few people that, are then targeted and torn down. But I also think there's an enormous freedom in speaking your mind. And the constraint of being a political staffer was everybody had a view of me, but you never heard from me. And that's the job, right? That's what you sign on to. I am far more liberated behind a camera than I could in any other domain now, because I can actually say what I think. And as I said, I may or may not line up with the orthodoxy of the Liberal Party always. But I do think that there are so many more people like us, John. You know, last 9 elections, the Labor Party has had a majority once. Gillard didn't have a majority. Rudd had the majority in 07. 9 elections. There are more people on the centre-right than the centre-left and beyond, right? So they need to feel that they are amongst friends and they are supported. So if I put my head above the parapet and I cop a few sort of whacks around the head, I'm fine with that, because that gives strength to people, you know, like my mum, who wouldn't necessarily want to enter the fray, but has deeply held convictions on all of these issues, as to people you know, and many of the people we're talking to tonight. And we need to be out there as spear carriers for them.
Is that what keeps you going? Because again, it's been mentioned to me many times to ask Peta, how did she deal with the vitriol, the personal attacks, the venom? What kept? Many people ask me, what kept you going, and what keeps you?
Well, I
going?
have learned. I've learned this. I learned this from the Abbott era. I used to get so upset at the nasty rubbish that was written, and it would be so way off the mark, right? And the journalists wouldn't even bother to ring and give me a chance to respond or anything like that. And I remember reading the Charles Moore Thatcher book, and it was like I never even thought of this. She just one day decided to stop reading the bad press. She didn't start a day letting them get inside her head. And I thought to myself, why am I reading it? It was good enough for the Iron Lady. And so I don't sit on Twitter, and I don't trawl through Facebook reading what two-bit nobodies have to say about me turning up to Andrew's press conference. I mean, that I Stand With Dan group are highly organised. A lot of them are union activists.
Public servants.
They're the hard left and others, and they are designed to weaken your resolve, to get into your head and make you second-guess yourself. So why would I give them that go, right? Why would I let them get into my mind and get me to pull back in any way, or feel diminished by that? You know, to be honest, that stuff now, after working in politics, is water off a duck's back. And even when I go to the supermarket, you know, I live near Collingwood, so it's Green's hunting ground. Even when I go to the supermarket and people have a crack at me, it's like, you know what, I'm fine with it. I'm honestly fine with it. As long as the people I respect give me a fair go, not a good go, but a fair go, I don't care about what the hard left and others have to say.
So talking of the hard left, we've got another question from Ivor in Western Australia. One of the interesting things about the lockdown last year was the amazing amount of sympathy that we as Victorians got from all around.
Thank God we didn't get it from our government.
We didn't get it from the government. So the next question is from Ivor in Western Australia, who has a question about Victoria for you, Peta.
My name is Ivor from WA. My question is, I've seen much on television about Dan Andrews, especially on Sky News, and I am wondering why he is so popular with the Victorians.
Well, I wrote myself some notes because I thought carefully about this, because I'm often asked the same question. I'm sure you are too, John.
I say, where do you begin?
So the political analyst in me, someone who has, you know, won government, working for, I think, one of the best opposition leaders in our history, Tony Abbott, from a place where the Liberal Party at that time, he took office as leader in 2009, we had 4 leaders, if you count Mr Howard, in 3 years. So we were in a very, very low ebb. And so I look at Daniel Andrews dispassionately. He's a ruthless operator, so there is no heir apparent nipping at his heels. It gives him enormous latitude. He comes out of the party machine, so he controls the party. He's got a lot of union funds and union support. He has a very serious, one of the best in the country, social media operations.
Yes. Paid for by taxpayers.
Paid for by taxpayers. Paid for by taxpayers in a way that would not be allowed inside the entitlement rules in Canberra. For example, Scott Morrison's got about 600 followers on his Facebook. Anything he does in that domain is paid for by the Liberal Party, as it was with Tony Abbott. And here we are in Victoria, 1 million followers that he's amassed. So he cuts out all the channels to media that disagree with him or puts him under some pressure and goes straight, the way John Howard did by going straight to the radio and cutting out the editorial content. He uses ruthlessly social media. I think that there's not much of an opposition. To be kind to the Liberal Party, I think they have a go. I mean, I see the releases, I see the effort out there every day, but they don't cut through because he's just a ruthless communicator. Labor politics, left politics in Victoria are tribal in a way I don't see in other states, and certainly tribal in a way that the centre-right isn't tribal. Going back to the point I made before about institutions, he has his people, not just Labor people, but his people in a lot of the key institutions. Union money, CFMU here is very, very powerful and rich. That's all flowing through to him. And he has built a support base with the left because he accidentally became the Premier after one term of the Libs, stupidly themselves knifing a leader in the first term, or they'd watched Canberra and see that didn't work well, but it did here anyway. So he won, and the Liberal winning with such a narrow margin would have held back, been tentative in a policy sense, wanted to sort of cement that term, perhaps go a bit bolder in the second term. He went hard from day one, right? He did not waste his opportunity, and he has used his mandate to deliver, on the face of it, good roads and intersections. So Middle Australia, Middle Victoria bats him in. But then underneath it all,
a very hard left social agenda.
Very radical, hard left social agenda. And that's extraordinary.
And then talking about that and Dan Andrews, and he's managed through a crisis, and he's used and manipulated the crisis. And that's our next question from Sue here in Victoria related to the crisis and to journalism and to politics.
I'm Sue from Victoria, and this is my question. It seems that everything in the media today is a crisis. How can we stop that form of journalism?
It's hard, isn't it?
And then Dan Andrews uses the crisis.
Yeah, so it is one chicken and one egg. It's hard to work out which is which. Traditional media is fighting for the attention of an audience, right? That audience was there every single night, after school with kids, there at 6 o'clock, there on weekends, a Sunday night movie, all of that stuff, gone. And so not only are people not watching it live, sport and news are the two exceptions. Everything is obviously on delayed, watched at a time when they want to watch it, watched in binge. The streaming services are putting pressure on commercial players. But advertising, as we saw with the Facebook debate last year, advertising is also now on multiple platforms. So they are desperate to create a reason for you to watch live news and a crisis unfolding, which is exactly what happened to most of the news outlets last year. They all had a lift in audience share. Streaming services can't compete with that because they're not live. They have to keep that going. Now, no editor's told me that, but that's my sense of it, particularly on the commercial bulletins. They're always looking for an angle to kick things along.
So talking about something in the media that's not commercial, the ABC. Many members of the public talk to me about the ABC, and Lynn has a question to you, Peter, about the ABC, which I'm sure you might have been asked more than once.
Good evening, Peter. I'm Lynn Merrigan from Victoria, and my question is, what can be done about the ABC? And if that could be done, would the LNP have the backbone to do it? Thank you.
That's a good double barrel, that one. So for my druthers, in the Howard years, I worked for Richard Alston, and now I was his broadcasting advisor. And then later on, I worked for Helen Coonan when she was Communications Minister as her Chief of Staff. I think Helen had a lot on her plate, and it was the end of the Howard era. She had T3 and she had media reform. She wasn't an ABC warrior. Richard Alston was. Janet Albrechtsen went on the board. Michael Kroger went on the
Morris
board.
Newman, I think, was
Morris
chair.
Newman was the chair. There was a lot of push by Richard in Senate estimates to hold them to account for examples of bias or straying away from the editorial charter. That's sort of fallen away. Now, you could argue, and Michael Kroger will say, even with us there, we barely made a dent. I have found the ABC, when you get out in country areas, radio particular, to be fairly straight. It's the influence of Ultimo, the inner city suburb where the main operation and the executives are based, that I think is the real cancer. I think the best thing you could do is to decentralise and move it out of Sydney. And if it had to be for a reason to be in a capital city, put it all in Brisbane or Adelaide or somewhere Tasmania, because the zealots that live in the inner city of Sydney are not going to move, and you get a chance then to shed some staff, like backroom staff, better efficiencies, let's say with SBS or whatever, but also have some cultural change. Would they do it? The problem is Malcolm Turnbull was the communications minister, then he was the Prime Minister, nothing going to happen. And now Paul Fletcher, who's a moderate or left-wing Liberal, he's not going to do much to push and shove the ABC into some sort of order. I was always in favour of holding them back from their online and other things in terms of keeping them to their knitting, television predominantly, radio predominantly, and saying that they had to put advertising in these other areas in order to compete on fair terms with all the other players that are in the online world. I mean, no media company gets $1 billion without having to demonstrate an audience, and they're wiping out their competition. So it's a real scorched earth policy. Interesting to see that not much has changed with Ida Buttrose, and I think they wear their activism now as a badge of courage.
Because they know the Liberals won't do anything.
Yeah.
What would take the Liberals to do something?
Look, I have to say across a whole range of issues, there's a lack of bravery. I mean, 18C was very close to your heart, right? So Tony Abbott took to an election 18C, had a mandate for 18C. A whole bunch of characters like Craig Laundy, who were elected on that mandate, spoke out against it vociferously in the party room, and he could not get through his own party room a principled commitment that they would only months before had been elected on a landslide vote to enact. How does that work?
Talking then about bravery and culture, can I read to you something you wrote in one of your columns a number of months ago, which I think is very powerful? So it's a couple of lines. Every day I have to remind myself that Australia is still the best country in the world, because almost every day I find myself wondering, how on earth did we end up here? Is this really what the generations before us sacrificed so much to build? A nation at war with itself, with people frightened to speak their minds and cancelled if they do. And this is what I wanted to ask you about, Peter. On issues of culture, even the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, has gone missing. Asked on radio on Friday whether we're too woke, Scott Morrison said, "Who cares? I just want people in jobs and I want them healthy." And you then acknowledged, fair enough, you wrote, perhaps on the day Victoria was about to enter its third lockdown. But a PM modelling himself on John Howard can't cop out of every fight. Now, Peter, I'm asking you this in the context of here in Victoria, again at Parkdale Secondary College, a government school, 16-year-old boys told to stand up because they are Christian, white and male. You pointed out that the Liberal Party, the coalition, has won most of the last elections. Why does it feel we are losing?
A combination of things. There is a lack of bravery with many of them. I mean, look at the fact that Peter Dutton in 3 months in that portfolio has done more than his predecessors.
Cancelling one Tea Party has sent a stronger signal than anything we've done in years.
Correct. And told them to get back to their knitting of protecting Australia. You're the Defence Force, you know? You're nothing more than the Defence Force. As good as the Defence Force is, you're not a cultural, you know, advanced party of the woke. There's a lack of bravery. And it's excused away as pragmatism, but it's an absence of conviction. It's not being pragmatic. In my view, it's being weak. Again, Daniel Andrews wouldn't waste his time in office. And on the culture issues, the coalition has had 3 terms and moved the needle not a titch, right, on the big cultural issues. I mean, even the commitments, and I have reservations about legislating religious freedom.
As the IPA does.
I have serious reservations. But there was nonetheless 5 years now a commitment that there would be protections for religious entities. Now, we can see in Queensland at the moment the debate about euthanasia and a range of faith-based aged care homes being forced by the draft legislation at least to do something that is absolutely against their conscience. They have no federal protections because for 5 years Malcolm Turnbull promised everything would happen and nothing has happened. Nothing's been advanced. So it's all of those things. I think the coalition has got a bit of a Labor disease in that they see now holding power as an end justifies the means, or the most important, as important as it is, there's no good being there if you're minding the shop, as Thatcher would say. There's no good being there, and the only thing you can say to defend yourself is you're better than the other side. Well, only, you know, with Malcolm Turnbull, only marginally. There's no good being there if you don't do something with it. Now, the mantle of national security, fine. The mantle of economic security, we're in trouble with that budget for a whole range of reasons I can talk about. And I accept some level of stimulus spending. This is 4 years baked in, recurrent, going like that stimulus spending. That is not what it is. And so if you put that to one side, what about all of these other things? You know, where is the defence of gender and normative gender? Where is pushing back on the curriculum? Incredibly important.
We have this happening right now. We are about to have identity politics. We are about to have critical race theory baked in, as you've said, into the curriculum.
Correct.
We will have young people learning up to hate themselves and hate Australia, and the coalition hasn't said.
Well, and the best that the Minister Alan Tudge has said is he doesn't agree with it. He'll vote against it, but he's one of many votes in the room.
That's
now,
right.
his predecessor, but the federal coalition set up a review. Number one lesson in politics: never have a review, and you know what, unless you know what the final outcome's going to be. So they went down a path, opened up this issue, basically put their pen in charge of the unions and the hard left inside the various bureaucracies of education, and they wonder why they've got this unintended consequence.
Can I then ask you a broader question related to this that the IPA has spent a lot of time working on over recent years, which is, has the centre-right or libertarians or conservatives or classical liberals relied too much on the Liberal Party to carry the torch for freedom? On the left and the centre-left, you've got the union movement, you've got civil society, you've got the party itself, you've got the media. It seems that on the centre-right we tend to rely too much on the coalition and too often we are let down.
2 points there. One, I think a very strong, broader organ on the centre-right puts steel in the spine of Liberals, and weak Liberals can't hide if you're putting pressure on them. But it also gives them a level of support, so they're not always the one going over the top of the parapet. So it's a positive, so it's a stick and a carrot, right? But I also think that one of the great tragedies in the last 15 years in politics, and I started in 98, has been this change in the Liberal Party. I mean, it used to be, when I worked for Richard Alston and Robert Hill, and Robert Hill's a great moderate, right? But Brendan Nelson, all these people could have done anything else with their lives, but they chose public life. And many of them took great hits to their pay and the usual sacrifices we hear about with family, but they so believed in the cause and also prepared all of them to walk away if they had to. Not so now. You know, the best thing most politicians will ever do is be a politician. They're not people who could have done other things. They get in there, they hold on to their stack branches, they've got there, they'll do whatever it takes to stay. They're not prepared on a point of principle to walk. And that gives you I think, a distortion in the party room, John, where you end up with, we have now, a party room that has a mix of left-wing Liberals and Conservatives that's out of odds with not just the broader Australian community, but the Liberal Party membership. And you then have a debate inside the party room about things like big government that should never even be debated in the Liberal Party, right? It's sort of tablets handed down from Moses that you do not support big government. But they have these puerile debates now because it's so flooded with people that would be better off on the left side of politics.
And we've written about this at the IPA, and somehow Liberals increasingly regard it as a credit to themselves that they are out-labouring the Labor Party to simply stay in government.
Shame on you, right? I mean, there's one thing for John Howard's broad church, but this is not the broad church. This is a takeover.
We have many, many questions to get to, but I am going to ask you about broad church. Is the Liberal Party now too big a broad church?
Absolutely.
What would you do?
I think it's beyond a church in some respects. I mean, the disdain for faith, the disdain for patriotism, this constant, I fear, I mean, I'm definitely not a Republican, but change for change's sake. I mean, the whole basis of centre-right conservative side of politics is identifying all of these things in our society that we want to keep and preserve and protecting them, going to war over them, like quite literally going to war over them. And I just, again, this line that we're just pragmatic, we've got to do whatever it takes to stay in power, not if you sell your soul.
Can I go to some more questions, Peter?
Go for it.
This question is from Chetna. We've been talking about institutions in civil society, and of course there's probably no more powerful institution than the public service.
Hi, I'm Chetna from Victoria, and my question to Peta today is, why do public service media invariably lean left in Western democracies, regardless of which party is in power?
So I think, look, there are, and I wrote about this on the weekend, so it's a very pressing question. There's lots of very professional public servants, but there's no doubt when a minister's appointed, they race up to try and capture them to their agenda. They like the useful idiot sort of minister, not the one that's going to put them under any pressure. If they're too tough on them, they'll start to leak. I mean, watch for Defence starting to go after Dutton. I mean, he'll hold the line.
They'll start leaking soon.
Yeah, well, it'll be the Defence bureaucrats, not the military. The military will stay with him. They self-select. I mean, if you are a 20-something and you believe in entrepreneurship and you're all about the individual, the last thing you want to do is relocate to Canberra, sign in up to the public service and, deal with that hierarchical sort of environment. And I think that then breeds a culture of people with a group think. And, of course, they all live inside Scott Morrison's Canberra bubble. I lived in that Canberra bubble for 16 years. Now, I got out and about, and the beauty of Abbott's time as leader and PM, it was always insistent outside of sitting weeks to get on the ground in marginal seats. Better than any poll he could read. It was just that gut sense, talking to people, looking at how many sort of for sale signs or for lease signs are up and down the main street, that sense of what's really happening on the ground. Most public servants have nothing like that. They marry each other, they, play sport, their kids together, they go to the same schools. It's just a hothouse. They're not of the hard left always, but they're of a mindset where they're insulated, their pay is healthy.
They lock us down, but they don't take a pay cut.
They don't
see their businesses going to their wall. Maybe they might know someone who's lost a job, a relative or a son or a daughter, but they're part of two economies.
Yeah.
And this is something that I think is changing about Australia, the bureaucratisation of policy.
But this is the big state, right? This is the big state, big
Australia
government.
did not used to be like this.
But where is the pushback on it, right? So every time I argue, you argue it about a big budget. I mean, $200 billion per annum in our budget is welfare. You try taking welfare off them. When Joe Hockey had the debate about winding back some of that heavy spending and having a conversation to say, you get 12 free trips to the Medicare, one a month, but if you want to go beyond that, it'll cost you a cup of coffee, as just an incentive for people to understand that they have to make some contribution to the $40 odd that the taxpayer's paying, that when you go to university, you have to pay something. It's not money for nothing. He reined in $36 billion of savings over 4 years. Chris Richardson said last week, if you look at the forward budget of the Morrison government, to get back to debt and deficit balance 2032, you're talking about $50 billion per year, each year, everywhere. Now, the political hit scored on Abbott and Hockey, trying to find 36 over 4, Petty the poor treasurer out there trying to argue $50 billion worth of saving every year, each year for a decade.
So I want to ask you about this. The 2014 budget of Abbott and Hockey was very important. Hockey told the truth. The age of entitlement is over. What happened then, and how much worse is it now? If in 2014 we couldn't make the changes we needed or start making the changes, how are we going to start making them in 5-10 years' time? Absent a crisis.
I honestly, well, hang on, we've had a crisis.
Absent.
I was hopeful last year that the pandemic would do a number of things. The pandemic would get us to understand that we need to have sovereign manufacturing capability, bring industries back to Australia, and that would force us to have an honest conversation about energy and open up gas, as we've seen last week with the Kurri Kurri plant announced by the government, but particularly have that conversation about nuclear. I thought we'd have this come to Jesus moment.
Cut red tape,
and the government,
cut taxes, unleash enterprise.
You know, Josh Frydenberg, when he was the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, used to have a red tape day twice a year. That's gone. We found 1,400 Quongos. Half of them were removed, disbanded. That's not happening anymore. They're growing like topsy. One of the hidden poison pills in the Morrison budget is a rapid increase of the public servants.
Yes.
We saw that in Victoria too. But for God's sake, you know, that's a centre-right government in Canberra. So they're the things that I think are problematic because it's a lack of willingness to have, like, I have no doubt that an eloquent communicator of a political leader, Mr. Howard was one obviously, Peter Costello, can have that conversation with the Australian people and you can bring them with you.
Some would say Paul Keating did the same.
When Abbott was tossing around how to deal with the CPRS coming out of the Copenhagen 2009, 2010, I remember that, and I was the Secretary to Shadow Cabinet, I remember the conversations where he said, this is madness and we have to tackle it head on. Half of them went to water. The next sort of quarter of them were like, oh my God, we'll never win that debate and I'll lose my seat and, you know, I'll be persona non grata in the nice parts of Sydney. And then about another quarter over here, the final quarter, we're up for the debate. And Brian, my husband, had the view coming out of Canada too, that you frame this very much as an economic issue. This is Stephen Harper. And so that's how the carbon tax became what it was to ordinary Australians. They understood the ramifications. The beauty for the left of the carbon debate is it's so complex and they rely on the complexity that you can save the planet and it won't cost you $1. We all know that's rubbish. And that was the communications weaponry of someone with you know, Tony Abbott's skill and a lot of other people out there in the fray supporting him. I have no doubt that the current government, if they were prepared, Scott's a great communicator, if they were prepared to tackle some of these big issues, cancel culture, energy, all of that, he can win
Abbott
them
won
over.
25 seats arguing the case.
Because, go back to my point, it's conviction, it's bravery. Like he fundamentally believed it, as did John Howard on budget repair and reform, as did Peter Costello. you can smell the hollow politician from the get-go, right? You can see that there's no conviction. And I am confident if they were prepared to have the fight, right? And I'm not saying right across the board, pick 4 or 5 issues and really
Pick one issue.
nail them at the next election,
yeah.
right? Really,
What would it be?
Real energy.
Go. Can you talk a few moments before the
Well,
end of that?
if we don't resolve our energy future, I don't know, forget the lights staying on. How do we pay our way, John? I mean, if we're not even at a balanced budget to 2032, we've got $1 trillion of debt, we've got nothing left to sell. And I was there when we did T3 with Helen Coonan and the Howard years. We've got the NBN, well, who'd buy that? We've got Australia Post, that's not going to be sold. And that's why, I always knew that Star Trek sold off at the side. But broadly speaking, how do we pay for our future? I mean, the NDIS was meant to be $12 billion a year. It's going to be, according to Australian on the weekend, $40 billion a year. How do you have that debate with Australians about the NDIS, about aged care, about we've had 30 years of superannuation and we've still got the majority of Australians at older age on the pension. How does that equate? How can you be a young person in this country, fit and able, and you can live on the dole for the rest of your life? How do we tolerate that? How do we not say to someone under the age of 30, you get 6 weeks. You've fallen on hard times, you get 6 weeks. After 6 weeks, you got to go and get a job. You got to knock on restaurant doors and wash dishes or mop floors, all the things that I am not too proud to say I did as a uni student. You got to do that.
That was, and we remember the passing of Andrew Peacock a number of weeks ago. Of course, that was the Liberal Party policy in the 1990 election. Targeted welfare and get people to get a job if they can work. What's changed? Is it the boom? Is it complacency? What's happening?
Well, I think in party politics, it's just trying to avoid a fight all the time. But I think that the best politicians embrace the fight. They look for the fight. They invite the fight, because the fight is the contrast between you and them. It's that point of division in the elector's mind, the voter's mind, that says that's what they stand for and that's what these guys stand for, and I'm more of that than that. If you don't create that contrast, then you're buying votes with taxpayer dollars with goodies, right? But if you can see, look at the Upper Hunter by-election, 83% of the votes cast on that weekend went to pro-coal candidates. That was a debate about coal. And the National Party won a debate for a third-term Liberal government on coal. And that had a, cavalcade of crises going into it, but they won on coal.
They had Malcolm Turnbull's Twitter account.
Well, you had, look, Tony Abbott won 25 seats opposing a carbon tax. It can be done, right? It can be done. But I think energy, if we can't pay for our future, if we are impoverishing ourselves and our industry and sending jobs offshore and all of that for nothing in terms of environmental gain, and we've got this looming dragon to our north who is, in an economic sense, growing stronger, and in a military sense, absolutely on the march, we are crazy. Like, learn your history. Go back to look at 1939 and you can see all of these lessons here. We have to wake up. We have to take the Australian people into our confidence and have these conversations. I am confident. If you look at that electoral history I talked about before, they are up for being treated like adults and brought into these debates and conversations. Have a debate about nuclear. Have a debate about China. Treat the public with respect about their level of intelligence and bring them with us. And I think the government could do it. Will they do it? I'm not so sure.
In our last few minutes together, can I then ask you about nuclear power? You're a passionate advocate for a discussion about nuclear. How do you change the dial on the nuclear power discussion in Australia?
I think people need to learn more about it. I mean, they don't teach anything about nuclear power at school, do they? Right?
They do learn about Greenpeace under the national curriculum. literally?
I think when you understand the comparisons of where Europe is on its power and a terrible Australia with its emissions, and then you understand, France, 70% of nuclear, Britain has nuclear, I think the more informed people are, I think the more they are open to the idea. And I think there's obviously a whole lot of technological change with nuclear, well and beyond people's old ideas of Chernobyl. And I think that if they understood how modern the systems are now and how flexible small-scale reactors are, I think that they would be willing to at least give the government a hearing. And I think not to even have that debate is weak. And I'm not saying announce an election commitment that you're going to put one right now in, Williamstown tomorrow. But again, treat the public with respect. Bring them into those debates.
Can I then ask you two final questions? And you've touched on this. Are you optimistic about the future for Australia? And if you are, why?
I'm optimistic about Australians because I think, broadly speaking, they get it right at the electorate booth. So there's something in the heart and soul of all Australians that's a pretty good BS meter. My concern is about civil society, governance and the media. And particularly for the Liberal Party, the party machine, which is under real pressure with the weight of the union movement funding Labor, and there's no sort of corollary with the Conservative side. It's tough going for the Conservatives. And I think also some of the talent constraints about getting the best people into politics. So I have great faith in the people of Australia. I worry about our capacity to deliver for the people. I worry about that. I'm concerned, obviously, broadly speaking, about the budget. I'm worried about energy. And I did say to Brian, and I said, this is a terrible thing to say, but when I turned 50 back in March, I sort of said, I'm actually glad that I'm 50 and I'm not 20, because if we've changed this much for me since I finished uni in the last 30 years, I don't want to be around in the next 50, 60, 70 years. If this is the trajectory where we're headed and we can't pull it back, where we deny biological reality and so many other things, if this is where we are and we're losing our sense of Western civilization's great gains for humanity, I'm glad I'm not around to see that. Now, that's a terrible indictment about where we are as a country. And I want to be glass is half full. I try every day to find something to be glass is half full. And I get great strength from, good people tonight, people on my Facebook page, people watching the show who have the same views as us. So I know there's an army of us out there, John. It's just how do we keep them believing that the tide will turn?
So, Peter, as a final question, you're doing so much to turn the tide. Thank you for us as Australians. At the end of this conversation this evening, I know what's going to be in my email box and in my texts from members of the IPA from around Australia, and it's this final question that I'm going to ask you that many people have spoken to me about, and it was the single most popular question that was sent in for today's discussion. Peter,
John,
would you consider entering Parliament and representing mainstream Australians?
I'll give you my very honest answer. I never really started with a defined career path. I finished law. My father died suddenly. I took a job with Kay Patterson writing speeches, and I never set out to do 16 years in politics and work for the Prime Minister. It just all happened organically. And I'm lucky, right? Blessed to be at the apex of our government and seen our democracy up close. But those last few years, when Malcolm was mowing mercilessly down an elected Prime Minister, I was wounded. You know, like pretty bloody brutal, John. You wouldn't know the name. No one would know the name of Scott Morrison's Chief of Staff, but you all knew my name. And it was just a massive pile-on, and I found it really hard. And I was very happy to be a backroom person. Had always never intended to run, and only, to be honest, really agreed to do Sky just for that election in 2016, just because I thought I can write whatever I like to say that that's not who I was, and I need a fair go, and this is why, etc. But the best thing I can do is just go on an election panel, let people have a look at me, and they'll make their own view, right? And I don't care whether they like me or not, but I just wanted them to have a more rounded view of who Peta Credlin was. I found I liked it, and I found the audience responded to me.
You were very good at it.
And I thoroughly enjoyed, for the first time in my political life, having my own voice. Now, would I give that up to go into Parliament, to be constrained again, as all, you know, good MPs should be constrained by a party ethos? I'd need some convincing. And I'm also, I don't know, there are some in the party room that I would have less in common with as a Liberal than I would with someone like Joel Fitzgibbon. You know, there are people in the Labor Party that I would have more ideological connection with than some of the moderates in inner city seats. And I wonder what's going to happen longer term with the Liberal Party is that rub inside the party room is very different and exaggerated compared to where the party membership is. So I don't say never, 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 but I'm very happy where I am.
Peta Credlin, so many Australians are glad you have not said never, never, never. Thank you for a wonderful discussion today.
Thank you, John. And I promised at the start, didn't I, that I wanted just to say something about the IPA. When I was really with my back against the wall and in a tough spot last year, trying to absorb all the coat stuff, being hit from all sides by the left, trying to do a nightly show and write my columns and all the other sort of day job stuff, when I desperately needed help, you were amazing. The IPA was amazing and gave me a resource here, a lawyer who was phenomenal, just helping me. Like, we're talking about documents like this, delving through them, joining the dots. Everyone will say they're with you, but no one actually gives you practical help. And it was me by myself up against this phalanx of lawyers in the Code Inquiry, and just having one other person from your team just made an enormous difference. And I will never forget that. And that's a good reason why partly I'm here tonight, because I want your members to know how important it is to support the IPA, and you were amazing last year. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you as IPA members. Thank you for your support. That concludes today's discussion of IPA Encounters.